Los Angeles in 1947 was a city caught between dreams and nightmares. The war was over, soldiers were returning home, and Hollywood glamour painted a veneer of prosperity over a metropolis struggling with post-war tensions. Beneath the palm trees and studio lots, a darker reality festered: corruption in City Hall, vice in the streets, and violence that would soon shock the nation. It was in this volatile atmosphere that one of America's most notorious unsolved murders would unfold, forever changing how the public viewed both crime and media sensationalism. The victim would become known as the Black Dahlia, though her real name was Elizabeth Short, a 22-year-old aspiring actress whose brutal death would capture headlines for decades and spawn countless books, films, and theories. Her story is not merely one of murder, but a complex web of ambition, desperation, media manipulation, and investigative failure that continues to fascinate criminologists and the public alike. Elizabeth Short was born on July 29, 1924, in Hyde Park, Massachusetts, the third of 5 daughters born to Cleo and Phoebe Short. Her early life was marked by abandonment and instability. When Elizabeth was 6 years old, her father, Cleo, disappeared without a trace, leaving behind only his car near a bridge, leading the family to believe he had committed suicide. Phoebe was left to raise 5 daughters during the Great Depression, a task that proved overwhelming both financially and emotionally. The family's circumstances were dire. They moved frequently, sometimes living in poverty so extreme that they relied on welfare and the kindness of neighbors. Elizabeth, even as a child, seemed to understand that escape from this life would require something extraordinary. She was described as unusually beautiful, with striking features and an ethereal quality that set her apart from her peers. More importantly, she possessed an unwavering belief that she was destined for something greater than her circumstances suggested. As Elizabeth entered her teenage years, her obsession with Hollywood and movie stars intensified. She spent hours at local theaters, studying the mannerisms of screen sirens like Rita Hayworth and Veronica Lake. She practiced poses in mirrors, experimented with makeup, and began cultivating the mysterious persona that would later contribute to her posthumous nickname. Friends remembered her as dreamy and romantic, always talking about moving to California and becoming a movie star. The family received a shocking revelation in 1942 when Cleo Short contacted them from California. He had not committed suicide as they had believed, but had simply abandoned his family during the economic hardship. While this news provided relief that he was alive, it also reopened old wounds of abandonment and betrayal. For Elizabeth, however, it represented something else entirely: a connection to California and the promise of a different life. In 1943, at the age of 19, Elizabeth made her first attempt at independence by moving to Vallejo, California, to live with her father. The reunion was far from the fairy tale she had imagined. Cleo had remarried and was living modestly, working various jobs to make ends meet. More troubling, he had developed drinking problems and a volatile temper. Elizabeth found herself trapped in another dysfunctional household, but this time with the added tension of being an unwelcome reminder of his previous life. The situation deteriorated rapidly. Elizabeth clashed frequently with her father and his new wife, who viewed her as an intruder and a financial burden. Her dreams of Hollywood seemed further away than ever, and the reality of California proved harsh and unforgiving. After several months of increasing conflict, Elizabeth was forced to return to Massachusetts, her first attempt at escape having ended in failure. But Elizabeth Short was not one to surrender her dreams easily. In 1946, despite her family's concerns and financial limitations, she made the decision that would ultimately lead to her tragic fate. She would return to California, this time to Los Angeles, determined to make it as an actress regardless of the obstacles. She had no solid plan, limited resources, and only a vague understanding of how the entertainment industry operated, but she possessed an unshakable faith in her own destiny. Elizabeth arrived in Los Angeles in July 1946 with less than $50 to her name and nowhere to stay. The city she encountered was both exactly what she had dreamed of and nothing like she had expected. Hollywood Boulevard glittered with neon signs and movie theaters, but behind the glamour lay a harsh reality of unemployment, exploitation, and dashed dreams. Thousands of young women arrived in Los Angeles every month with similar aspirations, and very few ever achieved even modest success. Elizabeth's first challenge was basic survival. Without money for an apartment or hotel, she relied on the kindness of strangers and new acquaintances for shelter. She developed a pattern of staying with various men she met, sometimes for just a few days, sometimes for weeks. These arrangements were often misunderstood by later investigators and media reports, which suggested she was promiscuous or involved in prostitution. However, those who knew her well insisted that Elizabeth was actually quite prudish about sex and that these living situations were purely practical arrangements for survival. Her appearance during this period was striking and deliberately cultivated. Elizabeth had developed a preference for black clothing, black dresses, black accessories, even black underwear, which was unusual for young women of the era who typically favored brighter colors. She styled her dark hair in victory rolls and applied dramatic makeup that emphasized her pale skin and dark features. This distinctive look would later contribute to her posthumous nickname, though during her lifetime, friends simply knew her as Beth. Elizabeth threw herself into the pursuit of acting work with the determination of someone who believed she had no alternative to success. She made the rounds of casting offices, waited in lines for auditions, and networked with anyone who might have connections in the industry. She posed for photographs, both professional headshots and more casual pictures, always maintaining the mysterious, sultry persona she believed would set her apart from other aspiring actresses. The reality of the entertainment industry, however, proved brutal. Elizabeth lacked formal training, professional connections, and the financial resources necessary to sustain a prolonged career campaign. Most casting directors saw her as just another beautiful but inexperienced hopeful. She managed to secure only the most minor of roles, reportedly appearing as an extra in a few films, but nothing that provided either significant income or career advancement. As months passed, Elizabeth's living situation became increasingly precarious. She moved frequently, sometimes staying in cheap hotels when she could afford them, other times relying on the generosity of new acquaintances. She developed relationships with several men during this period, though the exact nature of these relationships remains a subject of debate among investigators and biographers. What is clear is that Elizabeth was seeking both emotional support and practical assistance, and that her beauty and charm made her attractive to men who were willing to provide temporary help. One significant relationship during this period was with Robert "Red" Manley, a 25-year-old married salesman from Huntington Park. Manley later became a key figure in the investigation of Elizabeth's murder, as he was one of the last people known to have seen her alive. Their relationship appears to have been more emotional than physical, with Elizabeth viewing Manley as a potential savior who might provide the stability and support she desperately needed. By late 1946, Elizabeth's situation had become desperate. Her dreams of stardom remained as distant as ever, her financial resources were exhausted, and her network of potential helpers was wearing thin. She had developed a reputation among some circles as a beautiful but troubled young woman who was always in need of help but unable to provide much in return. Some acquaintances viewed her with sympathy, others with suspicion, but most recognized that she was living an unsustainable existence that seemed destined for tragedy. Despite these hardships, Elizabeth maintained her optimism and continued to believe that her break was just around the corner. She wrote letters to friends and family back east that painted a rosier picture of her circumstances than reality warranted. She spoke of meetings with producers, potential screen tests, and imminent opportunities that would transform her life. Whether she truly believed these stories or was simply maintaining hope through self-deception remains unclear, but her persistence in the face of overwhelming obstacles was both admirable and heartbreaking. The last month of Elizabeth Short's life began with what seemed like a positive development. In December 1946, she received an invitation to visit Dorothy French, a young woman she had met who worked at a local restaurant. Dorothy lived with her mother, Elvira French, in Pacific Beach, near San Diego. The French women had been touched by Elizabeth's circumstances and offered her a place to stay during the Christmas holidays. Elizabeth accepted the invitation gratefully, viewing it as an opportunity to rest, regroup, and plan her next move. The French family welcomed her warmly, and for a brief period, Elizabeth experienced the kind of domestic stability that had been largely absent from her adult life. She helped with household chores, played with the family dog, and seemed to relax in ways that friends hadn't seen in months. However, even during this peaceful interlude, Elizabeth's restlessness and ambition remained evident. She continued to talk about returning to Los Angeles and pursuing her acting career. She made telephone calls to various contacts, trying to arrange meetings and opportunities for the new year. Her letters to family members during this period maintained the optimistic tone she had cultivated throughout her time in California, suggesting that 1947 would be the year her dreams finally came true. The French family later reported that Elizabeth received several telephone calls during her stay, some of which seemed to agitate her. While they didn't overhear the conversations, they noticed that she would become withdrawn and anxious after certain calls. Elizabeth was also observed writing letters that she was secretive about, leading some to speculate that she was involved in relationships or situations that she preferred to keep private. On January 8, 1947, Elizabeth announced that she needed to return to Los Angeles. She had apparently arranged to meet someone there, though she was vague about the details with the French family. Dorothy French later recalled that Elizabeth seemed both excited and nervous about the trip, suggesting that whatever she was planning represented both an opportunity and a risk. Robert "Red" Manley arrived to pick up Elizabeth on January 8, driving down from Los Angeles at her request. The journey back to Los Angeles would later become a crucial element in the murder investigation, as Manley was questioned extensively about their conversations and Elizabeth's demeanor during the drive. According to Manley, Elizabeth seemed optimistic about her prospects and mentioned that she had a meeting arranged with someone who might be able to help her career. The drive to Los Angeles took several hours, during which Manley and Elizabeth discussed her plans and her relationships with various people in the entertainment industry. Manley later told investigators that Elizabeth mentioned several names of people she was planning to contact, though some of these individuals were never conclusively identified. She also spoke about her family back east and her determination to make them proud by achieving success in Hollywood. Upon arriving in Los Angeles on the evening of January 8, Manley took Elizabeth to the Biltmore Hotel in downtown Los Angeles. This choice of destination would later prove significant, as the Biltmore was a prestigious establishment that catered to wealthy guests and entertainment industry figures. Elizabeth told Manley that she was meeting someone there, though she didn't specify who or provide details about the nature of the meeting. Manley later described dropping Elizabeth off in the hotel lobby around 6:30 p.m. She seemed confident and excited as she walked into the hotel, carrying her suitcase and appearing to know where she was going. This would be the last confirmed sighting of Elizabeth Short alive, though Manley's account would be scrutinized intensively by investigators who initially considered him a suspect in her murder. What happened to Elizabeth between the evening of January 8 and January 15, when her body was discovered, remains one of the central mysteries of the case. During those 7 days, she vanished completely from the known record. No confirmed sightings, no telephone calls to friends or family, no hotel registrations or other documentation has ever been found to establish her whereabouts or activities during this crucial period. The morning of January 15, 1947, dawned clear and cool in Los Angeles. Betty Berzinger was walking with her 3-year-old daughter along South Norton Avenue in the Leimert Park neighborhood, a middle-class residential area about 10 miles southwest of downtown Los Angeles. It was a routine morning walk, the kind of peaceful domestic activity that characterized life in this quiet suburban community. At approximately 10:15 a.m., as they walked along the sidewalk near the intersection of South Norton and 39th Street, Betty noticed something unusual in a vacant lot. At first glance, it appeared to be a discarded department store mannequin, pale and motionless among the weeds. The positioning seemed odd, however, and as she looked more closely, a horrifying realization began to dawn. Betty quickly steered her daughter away from the lot and hurried to a nearby house to call the police. Her voice shaking, she reported that she believed she had found a body. The operator initially seemed skeptical, as reports of mannequins or dolls being mistaken for human remains were not uncommon. However, Betty's distress was evident, and patrol officers were dispatched to investigate. Officers Frank Perkins and Will Fitzgerald arrived at the scene within minutes of the call. What they discovered was far more horrific than either veteran policeman had ever encountered. The body of a young woman lay bisected at the waist, with the two halves positioned about a foot apart. The corpse had been drained of blood and washed clean, giving it the pale, waxy appearance that had initially made Betty Berzinger think it was a mannequin. The condition of the body indicated that this was no ordinary murder. The precision of the bisection suggested surgical knowledge or experience, and the complete absence of blood at the scene indicated that the murder had taken place elsewhere. Most disturbing of all were the mutilations to the victim's face. Her mouth had been slashed from ear to ear in what criminologists would later term a Glasgow smile, creating a grotesque grin that added an element of sadistic cruelty to the crime. As more officers arrived at the scene, the magnitude of the discovery became clear. This was not just a murder, but a crime that seemed designed to shock and horrify. The careful positioning of the body, the meticulous cleaning, and the public location all suggested that the killer had wanted the remains to be found and had crafted the scene for maximum impact. Detective Harry Hansen was among the first investigators to arrive at the scene. A veteran of the Los Angeles Police Department with over 20 years of experience, Hansen had seen numerous homicides, but nothing had prepared him for the sight that awaited him in that vacant lot. He immediately recognized that this case would require every resource the department could muster and would likely attract intense media attention. The body was photographed extensively before being removed to the Los Angeles County morgue for autopsy. The photos from the crime scene, while too graphic for newspaper publication, would become some of the most notorious images in criminal history. They captured not just the physical evidence of the crime, but the calculated cruelty of a killer who had turned murder into a form of twisted artistry. Initial examination of the body revealed no immediate identification. The victim appeared to be a young woman, probably in her early 20s, with dark hair and attractive features despite the mutilation. She wore no jewelry or clothing that might provide clues to her identity, and there were no personal effects found near the body. The killer had apparently taken care to remove anything that might lead to quick identification. News of the discovery spread quickly through the Los Angeles Police Department and then to the media. By afternoon, reporters were gathering at the crime scene and at police headquarters, demanding information about what was already being described as one of the most brutal murders in the city's history. The press attention would only intensify as details of the crime emerged and the victim's identity was established. The Los Angeles Police Department's investigation into the Norton Avenue murder began immediately, with Detective Harry Hansen assigned as the lead investigator. Hansen assembled a team of experienced detectives and forensic specialists, recognizing that the unusual nature of the crime would require a comprehensive approach combining traditional investigative methods with the most advanced forensic techniques available in 1947. The first priority was identifying the victim. With no identification found at the scene, investigators turned to fingerprints as their best hope for establishing the woman's identity. The body's hands were removed and sent to the FBI's fingerprint database in Washington, D.C., a process that in 1947 required several days of careful comparison work. While waiting for the fingerprint results, investigators canvassed the neighborhood around the crime scene, interviewing residents and searching for witnesses who might have seen or heard anything suspicious in the days leading up to the discovery. The Leimert Park area was primarily residential, with well-maintained homes and attentive neighbors, making it unlikely that a body could be deposited without someone noticing unusual activity. Several residents reported seeing cars in the vicinity during the previous few days, but descriptions were vague and conflicting. One witness claimed to have heard screaming on the night of January 13, but couldn't pinpoint the exact location or time. Another reported seeing a black sedan parked near the vacant lot on January 14, but couldn't provide details about the occupants or license plate. The autopsy, conducted by Dr. Frederick Newbar, revealed the full extent of the killer's brutality. The victim had been tortured extensively before death, with evidence of beatings, cuts, and burns throughout her body. The cause of death was determined to be hemorrhage and shock caused by the lacerations to her face, though the extensive injuries made definitive determination challenging. Most significantly, the autopsy revealed that the bisection of the body had been performed with considerable skill, suggesting that the killer had anatomical knowledge or experience with surgical procedures. The cuts were clean and precise, made with sharp instruments, and showed evidence of planning rather than frenzied violence. This finding would become a crucial element in developing a profile of the suspect. The lack of blood at the crime scene confirmed investigators' initial assessment that the murder had taken place elsewhere. The body had been thoroughly washed and drained before being transported to Norton Avenue. This indicated that the killer had access to a location where such extensive procedures could be performed without detection, possibly a medical facility, mortuary, or private residence with appropriate facilities. On January 17, 2 days after the body's discovery, the FBI fingerprint comparison yielded results. The victim was identified as Elizabeth Short, age 22, of Massachusetts. Her fingerprints were on file because she had been arrested in Santa Barbara in September 1943 on a minor charge related to underage drinking. This identification opened new avenues for the investigation while also attracting massive media attention. With Elizabeth's identity confirmed, investigators began tracing her movements and associations in Los Angeles. They quickly discovered her transient lifestyle and network of casual relationships, which presented both opportunities and challenges for the investigation. While she had known many people during her time in California, most relationships had been brief and superficial, making it difficult to identify individuals who might have had motive for murder. The investigation team expanded to include detectives from multiple divisions, with FBI agents also offering assistance given the interstate aspects of the case. A command center was established at the LAPD's Central Division, with charts and maps tracking Elizabeth's known movements, associates, and potential suspects. The case was assigned the highest priority status, with resources typically reserved for cases involving prominent citizens or threats to public safety. Media coverage intensified as details about Elizabeth's life emerged. Reporters discovered her aspirations to become an actress, her struggles with poverty, and her habit of staying with various men who offered assistance. These details, while relevant to understanding her circumstances, were often sensationalized in ways that both hindered the investigation and damaged Elizabeth's posthumous reputation. The Elizabeth Short murder case became a media phenomenon unlike anything Los Angeles had experienced. Within days of the body's discovery, newspapers were devoting front-page coverage to every development, real or imagined, in the investigation. The case combined elements that were irresistible to the press of 1947, a beautiful victim, a brutal crime, Hollywood connections, and a mystery that seemed to deepen with each revelation. It was during this media frenzy that Elizabeth Short became known as the Black Dahlia, a nickname that would forever overshadow her real name and identity. The exact origin of this moniker has been disputed, with several newspapers claiming credit for coining the term. The most commonly accepted explanation is that it derived from her preference for black clothing combined with the recent popularity of the film, The Blue Dahlia, starring Alan Ladd and Veronica Lake. The nickname was more than just a catchy headline. It transformed Elizabeth from a real person into a symbol, a mysterious figure that captured the public imagination while obscuring the reality of who she had actually been. The media portrayal often emphasized her beauty and glamour while speculating about her personal life in ways that were both sensational and often inaccurate. Newspapers competed fiercely for exclusive details about the case, sometimes compromising the investigation in their pursuit of scoops. Reporters contacted Elizabeth's family members back east, often asking intrusive questions about her personal life and relationships. They tracked down individuals who had known her in Los Angeles, sometimes paying for information or interviews that may not have been entirely truthful. One of the most problematic aspects of the media coverage was the emphasis on Elizabeth's personal relationships and living arrangements. The fact that she had stayed with various men during her time in Los Angeles was portrayed in ways that suggested she was promiscuous or involved in prostitution, despite evidence to the contrary from those who knew her well. These characterizations not only damaged her reputation but also created false leads that diverted investigative resources. The Los Angeles Examiner, one of the city's major newspapers, took particularly aggressive approaches to covering the story. They reportedly contacted Elizabeth's mother in Massachusetts and informed her of her daughter's death through a ruse, claiming they were calling to verify details for a story about Elizabeth winning a beauty contest. This deceptive practice, while yielding information for their coverage, was widely criticized and demonstrated the lengths to which some media outlets would go for a story. The intense media attention had significant impacts on the investigation. Witnesses were sometimes reluctant to come forward, fearing publicity or misrepresentation in the press. Potential suspects found themselves subjected to public scrutiny and speculation that could destroy reputations regardless of their actual involvement in the crime. The constant pressure for new developments also led to premature release of information that might have been more effectively used if kept confidential. Public fascination with the case generated thousands of tips and leads, most of which proved to be false or irrelevant. The Los Angeles Police Department was overwhelmed with phone calls from people claiming to have information about the murder, to have known Elizabeth, or even to be the killer themselves. Each lead had to be investigated, diverting resources from more promising avenues of inquiry. The media coverage also attracted individuals seeking attention or notoriety by inserting themselves into the story. False confessions became common, with dozens of people claiming responsibility for the murder. Some of these confessions were obviously fabricated, while others contained enough plausible details to require extensive investigation before being dismissed. One of the most significant media-related developments occurred when someone claiming to be the killer began sending letters and packages to newspapers. These communications included personal effects allegedly belonging to Elizabeth, as well as taunting messages directed at police and the press. While some of these items were later confirmed to have belonged to Elizabeth, investigators could never definitively establish whether they were sent by the actual killer or by someone seeking to exploit the case for attention. The Black Dahlia name and the associated media coverage transformed the case from a local murder investigation into a national obsession. Books, magazine articles, and eventually films would be produced about the case, each adding new theories and speculation to an already complex story. This cultural phenomenon, while keeping the case in the public consciousness, also made it increasingly difficult to separate fact from fiction in discussions of the crime. The Elizabeth Short murder investigation generated more than 150 suspects over the years, ranging from credible possibilities to bizarre theories that reflected more about their proponents than about the actual crime. The Los Angeles Police Department's case files eventually filled multiple cabinets, documenting an exhaustive but ultimately fruitless search for the killer. One of the earliest and most scrutinized suspects was Robert "Red" Manley, the salesman who had driven Elizabeth from San Diego to Los Angeles on January 8. Manley's status as the last person known to have seen Elizabeth alive made him an obvious focus of investigation, and he was subjected to intense questioning and multiple polygraph examinations. Manley's account of his final meeting with Elizabeth was consistent and detailed. He described picking her up at the French residence in San Diego, their conversation during the drive to Los Angeles, and dropping her off at the Biltmore Hotel. He claimed to have left Los Angeles immediately after dropping her off, returning to his home and work in Huntington Park. His alibi for the subsequent days was verified through multiple sources. Despite passing several polygraph tests and providing a consistent account of his activities, Manley remained under suspicion for months. The intensive scrutiny took a severe toll on his mental health and marriage. He was eventually cleared as a suspect when investigators concluded that he lacked both the opportunity and the psychological profile consistent with such a brutal crime. Dr. George Hodel emerged as perhaps the most discussed suspect in later years, though he was not initially prominent in the original investigation. Hodel was a prominent Los Angeles physician with a practice in Hollywood and connections to the art and entertainment communities. He was known for his sophisticated lifestyle and unconventional behavior, including alleged involvement in the Los Angeles cultural scene's more bohemian elements. The case against Dr. Hodel was developed decades later primarily through the efforts of his son, Steve Hodel, a former LAPD detective who became convinced of his father's guilt through personal investigation and analysis of evidence. Steve Hodel's theory suggested that his father had the medical knowledge necessary to perform the precise bisection of Elizabeth's body and had access to facilities where such procedures could be conducted without detection. Supporting evidence for Dr. Hodel's involvement included his ownership of a house in the Hollywood Hills that could have provided the privacy needed for the crime, his possession of medical instruments and knowledge, and his documented unusual behavior and possible psychological disorders. However, this case remained circumstantial, and Dr. Hodel died in 1999 without ever being formally charged or definitively linked to the murder. Another significant suspect was Walter Bailey, a surgeon who lived near the crime scene and had the medical expertise that investigators believed the killer possessed. Bailey's wife had worked at a hotel where Elizabeth had stayed briefly, providing a potential connection between the doctor and the victim. However, Bailey suffered from a degenerative brain disease that affected his mental state, and he died in 1948 before the investigation could focus extensively on him. Mark Hansen, a nightclub owner who had allowed Elizabeth to stay at his home briefly, also attracted investigative attention. Hansen knew many young women seeking careers in entertainment and had provided temporary housing for several aspiring actresses. Some theories suggested that Elizabeth might have become involved in activities at Hansen's nightclub that led to her murder, but no concrete evidence was ever developed to support these speculations. The investigation also explored connections to organized crime, given Los Angeles's reputation for corruption and vice operations in the 1940s. Some theories suggested that Elizabeth might have become involved with criminal elements, either through her associations with various men or through activities related to her survival in Los Angeles. However, no evidence was found to support organized crime involvement in her murder. Leslie Dillon, a bellhop from Miami, became a suspect when he inserted himself into the investigation by writing to a police psychiatrist claiming to have information about the case. Dillon's knowledge of certain details not released to the public made him a person of interest, but extensive investigation revealed that he had likely obtained his information through contacts in Los Angeles rather than direct involvement in the crime. Perhaps most frustrating for investigators were the numerous false confessions that continued to pour in throughout the investigation. These ranged from obviously delusional individuals seeking attention to more sophisticated hoaxes that required extensive resources to investigate and debunk. Some confessors provided details that seemed to indicate genuine knowledge of the crime, but follow-up investigation invariably revealed alternative explanations for their information. The sheer number of suspects and leads created significant challenges for the investigation. Resources were spread thin as detectives pursued multiple theories simultaneously. The media attention meant that information about potential suspects was often leaked to the press, compromising investigative strategies and potentially allowing guilty parties to evade detection. By the early 1950s, the active investigation had been scaled back significantly, though the case was never officially closed. Periodic reviews of the evidence and new investigative techniques were applied to the case over the decades, but no breakthrough ever emerged. The passage of time meant that witnesses died, evidence was lost or contaminated, and memories became unreliable. The Elizabeth Short murder case has been subjected to numerous forensic re-examinations over the decades, as advancing technology and investigative techniques offered new possibilities for solving the crime. Each new development in forensic science raised hopes that the Black Dahlia mystery might finally be resolved, though none has yet provided the definitive breakthrough investigators have sought. The original 1947 investigation utilized the most advanced forensic techniques available at the time, though these were primitive by modern standards. Fingerprint analysis was the primary identification method, and it successfully identified Elizabeth through prints on file from her previous arrest. However, no usable fingerprints were found at the crime scene or on Elizabeth's body, despite extensive examination. Photography played a crucial role in documenting the crime scene and the victim's injuries. The photographs taken by LAPD crime scene specialists provided detailed records that continue to be analyzed by modern investigators. These images, while disturbing, offer important evidence about the killer's methods and the crime staging that remains relevant to contemporary analysis. Blood analysis in 1947 was limited to basic typing, and a complete absence of blood at the crime scene meant that this avenue of investigation provided little useful information. The thorough washing of the body eliminated most potential trace evidence, demonstrating the killer's awareness of forensic procedures and determination to avoid detection. Modern DNA analysis has been applied to the case multiple times, though results have been limited by the age of the evidence and the contamination that occurred during the original investigation and subsequent handling. Some personal effects believed to have belonged to Elizabeth have been tested, but no profiles suitable for comparison with potential suspects have been developed. Advanced toxicology testing has been performed on preserved tissue samples, revealing no evidence of drugs or poisons that might have been used to incapacitate Elizabeth before her murder. This finding supports the conclusion that she was conscious during at least part of the ordeal, adding to the horror of the crime. Computer modeling and crime scene reconstruction techniques have been used to analyze the logistics of the murder and body disposal. These studies have provided insights into the physical requirements for moving and positioning Elizabeth's body, suggesting that the killer was likely a strong individual or had assistance from others. Psychological profiling, a discipline that didn't exist in 1947, has been applied retroactively to the case by modern criminal psychologists. These profiles suggest that the killer was likely an organized, methodical individual with possible medical or anatomical knowledge. The staging of the crime scene and the mutilation of the body indicate someone who derived psychological satisfaction from the act and wanted to shock the public. Geographic profiling techniques have been used to analyze the locations associated with Elizabeth's final days, the crime scene, and the disposal site. These analyses suggest that the killer was familiar with Los Angeles geography and may have lived or worked in the areas where Elizabeth was known to frequent. Advances in handwriting analysis have been applied to the various letters claimed to have been sent by the killer. While some communications show consistent characteristics suggesting they may have come from the same source, the authenticity of these letters remains disputed, and no definitive connection to the actual killer has been established. Modern investigative techniques have also been applied to re-examining witness statements and suspect information. Cold case specialists have identified inconsistencies and potential leads that were not fully explored in the original investigation, though none have led to definitive conclusions. The application of statistical analysis to the case has provided insights into the probability of various theories and the likelihood that different suspects were involved. However, these analyses are limited by the quality and completeness of the original evidence and cannot overcome the fundamental challenges posed by the passage of time. Database searches using modern criminal record systems have been conducted to identify individuals who might match the psychological and behavioral profile of the killer. This approach has generated new persons of interest, but none have been definitively linked to the crime through physical evidence. Despite these technological advances and modern investigative approaches, the fundamental challenges of the case remain. The killer's apparent sophistication in avoiding detection, the contamination and loss of evidence over time, and the death of key witnesses and potential suspects have created obstacles that even the most advanced forensic techniques cannot fully overcome. The unsolved nature of the Elizabeth Short murder has generated countless theories over the decades, ranging from carefully researched hypotheses to wild speculation that reflects more about society's fascination with the case than about the actual crime. These theories have been proposed by professional investigators, amateur sleuths, authors, and members of the public who have become obsessed with solving the mystery. One persistent theory suggests that Elizabeth's murder was connected to her alleged involvement in prostitution or other vice activities in Los Angeles. Proponents of this theory argue that her transient lifestyle and financial desperation might have led her to engage in prostitution, potentially bringing her into contact with dangerous criminals. However, this theory is contradicted by testimony from those who knew Elizabeth, who consistently described her as prudish about sexual matters and unlikely to engage in prostitution. The medical knowledge theory focuses on the precise nature of the bisection and suggests that the killer had surgical training or anatomical expertise. This theory has led investigators to focus on doctors, medical students, mortuary workers, and others with relevant knowledge. While the precision of the cuts does suggest some level of skill, critics argue that such knowledge could have been acquired through various means and doesn't necessarily indicate professional medical training. Some theories have connected Elizabeth's murder to the entertainment industry, suggesting that she might have discovered damaging information about prominent figures or become involved in exploitation schemes targeting aspiring actresses. These theories often involve elaborate conspiracies and cover-ups but lack concrete evidence linking specific industry figures to the crime. The personal relationship theory proposes that Elizabeth was killed by someone she knew, possibly a romantic partner or someone who had become obsessed with her. This theory is supported by the personal nature of the mutilation and the apparent planning involved in the crime. However, despite extensive investigation of Elizabeth's known associates, no individual has been definitively identified as having both the opportunity and motive for such extreme violence. Organized crime connections have been theorized based on Los Angeles's reputation for corruption and vice operations in the 1940s. Some suggest that Elizabeth might have witnessed criminal activities or become involved with organized crime figures through her various associations. However, no concrete evidence has been found linking organized crime to Elizabeth's murder, and the personal nature of the crime seems inconsistent with typical organized crime methods. The serial killer theory proposes that Elizabeth's murder was part of a pattern of similar crimes, possibly committed by an individual who killed multiple victims using similar methods. Researchers have identified other unsolved murders from the same period with similar characteristics, including precise mutilation and careful staging. However, no definitive links between these cases have been established. Some of the most elaborate theories involve government conspiracies or cover-ups, suggesting that Elizabeth's murder was connected to classified activities or that the investigation was deliberately sabotaged to protect powerful individuals. These theories often cite the unusual aspects of the media coverage and the failure of the investigation as evidence of official interference, though no credible evidence supports such claims. The multiple perpetrator theory suggests that Elizabeth's murder involved more than one individual, given the physical requirements of moving and positioning her body and the complex nature of the mutilation. This theory proposes that a group might have been responsible, possibly explaining the apparent organization and planning involved in the crime. However, coordinating such a crime among multiple individuals would increase the risk of detection and the likelihood that someone would eventually confess or provide information to authorities. Religious or occult theories have been proposed by those who interpret the mutilation and staging as having ritualistic significance. Some have suggested connections to satanic practices or other occult activities that were allegedly present in 1940s Los Angeles. These theories often focus on the symbolic aspects of the crime scene and the dates involved, but they lack credible evidence and are generally dismissed by serious investigators. The copycat theory suggests that Elizabeth's murder was designed to mimic other crimes or was inspired by fictional accounts of similar violence. This theory points to the theatrical nature of the crime scene and the apparent desire to create a spectacle that would attract attention. However, no specific sources of inspiration have been definitively identified. One of the most detailed theories was developed by Steve Hodel regarding his father, Dr. George Hodel. This theory combines circumstantial evidence, psychological analysis, and connections to other unsolved cases to build a comprehensive case for Dr. Hodel's guilt. While compelling in its detail and research, this theory remains controversial among investigators and has not been universally accepted. The random predator theory proposes that Elizabeth was the victim of an opportunistic killer who selected her based on availability rather than personal connection. This theory suggests that the killer might have encountered Elizabeth during her vulnerable period in January 1947 and taken advantage of her desperate circumstances. While such crimes do occur, the personal nature of the mutilation and the planning involved suggest a more targeted attack. The Elizabeth Short murder investigation faced numerous obstacles from its inception, many of which contributed to its ultimate failure to identify and prosecute the killer. Understanding these challenges provides insight not only into this specific case but into the broader difficulties of criminal investigation in the 1940s and the factors that can impede justice even in high-profile cases. The most significant challenge was the contamination and loss of evidence at the crime scene. In 1947, crime scene preservation techniques were far less sophisticated than modern standards. The Norton Avenue lot where Elizabeth's body was discovered was not immediately secured, allowing curious onlookers and media personnel to potentially disturb evidence. Police officers and detectives walked through the area without the careful documentation and protection protocols that would be standard today. The media frenzy surrounding the case created unprecedented difficulties for investigators. Reporters offered rewards for information, conducted their own interviews with potential witnesses, and sometimes obtained evidence before police. This interference compromised the integrity of witness statements and created a chaotic environment where rumor and speculation became mixed with factual evidence. The sheer volume of tips and leads generated by public interest overwhelmed the investigation team. The Los Angeles Police Department received thousands of calls and letters related to the case, each requiring some level of investigation. This massive influx of information, while demonstrating public engagement, diverted resources from more promising avenues of inquiry and made it difficult to prioritize the most credible leads. Jurisdictional issues complicated the investigation as Elizabeth's movements crossed multiple police department boundaries. Her stays in various locations throughout Los Angeles County meant that different agencies had pieces of information that were not always effectively shared or coordinated. The lack of centralized databases and communication systems in 1947 made comprehensive information sharing challenging. The investigation was also hampered by the social attitudes and limitations of the era. Elizabeth's lifestyle as a single woman staying with various men was viewed with suspicion and moral judgment that may have affected how seriously some investigators took certain aspects of her story. Additionally, the limited role of women in law enforcement meant that female perspectives that might have provided valuable insights were largely absent from the investigation. False confessions created enormous drains on investigative resources. More than 60 people confessed to Elizabeth's murder over the years, each requiring extensive investigation to verify or debunk their claims. Some confessors provided detailed accounts that seemed credible initially but were ultimately proven false through careful analysis of their alibis and knowledge of the crime. The lack of advanced forensic techniques available in 1947 severely limited the investigation's ability to process physical evidence. DNA analysis was decades in the future, advanced toxicology testing was unavailable, and crime scene reconstruction was rudimentary. The absence of blood at the crime scene meant that one of the most valuable types of forensic evidence was not available to investigators. Political pressure and public expectations created additional challenges for the investigation team. The high-profile nature of the case meant that there was enormous pressure to solve it quickly, potentially leading to premature conclusions or insufficient investigation of certain leads. The need to provide regular updates to the media and public also diverted time and attention from actual investigative work. The investigation suffered from a lack of psychological expertise that might have provided valuable insights into the killer's motivations and behavior patterns. Criminal profiling was not yet developed as a discipline, and the psychological aspects of the crime were not analyzed with the sophistication that would be available to modern investigators. Communication barriers existed between different levels of law enforcement. While the FBI provided some assistance, the coordination between local, state, and federal agencies was not as seamless as it would become in later decades. Important information may have been held by one agency while another was pursuing related leads without access to that information. The passage of time created compounding problems for the investigation. As months and years passed without resolution, witnesses moved away, memories faded, and physical evidence deteriorated. Key figures in Elizabeth's life died or became unavailable, making it increasingly difficult to reconstruct her final days and identify potential suspects. Record-keeping systems of the 1940s were inadequate for managing the massive amount of information generated by the case. Important documents were sometimes misfiled, lost, or damaged, making it difficult for later investigators to access all available information. The lack of computerized databases meant that cross-referencing information and identifying patterns was a manual, time-intensive process. The Black Dahlia case transcended its origins as a criminal investigation to become a cultural phenomenon that has influenced American popular culture, journalism, and public perception of crime for over 7 decades. The case's impact extends far beyond the unsolved murder itself, reflecting broader themes about media sensationalism, gender, violence, and society's fascination with mystery and tragedy. The media coverage of Elizabeth Short's murder marked a turning point in American crime reporting. The intense, often sensationalistic coverage set new standards for how high-profile criminal cases would be reported in the emerging age of mass media. The competition between newspapers to break new developments and provide exclusive information created a template that would be replicated in countless subsequent cases. The transformation of Elizabeth Short into the Black Dahlia represented one of the earliest examples of a victim becoming a brand or symbol rather than being remembered as a real person. This phenomenon would become increasingly common in later decades, as media coverage began to focus more on creating compelling narratives than on accurate reporting of facts. The case also reflected and reinforced certain attitudes about women, sexuality, and victimhood that were prevalent in 1940s America. Elizabeth's lifestyle as a single woman living independently and depending on various men for support was portrayed in ways that suggested moral judgment, with some coverage implying that her behavior had somehow contributed to her fate. This victim-blaming aspect of the coverage established patterns that would persist in crime reporting for decades. Hollywood's fascination with the case began almost immediately and has continued to the present day. The combination of a beautiful victim, a brutal crime, and Hollywood connections made it irresistible to filmmakers and writers seeking dramatic material. Over the years, the case has inspired numerous films, television shows, books, and documentaries, each adding new layers of interpretation and speculation to the original facts. James Ellroy's 1987 novel, The Black Dahlia, brought renewed attention to the case and demonstrated how fictional treatments could shape public understanding of historical events. Ellroy's noir interpretation of the case captured the dark atmosphere of 1940s Los Angeles while creating a compelling narrative that filled in the gaps left by the unsolved investigation. The novel's success led to increased interest in the case and influenced how subsequent generations would understand the story. The case has become a touchstone for discussions about unsolved crimes and the limitations of criminal justice systems. It is frequently cited as an example of how even intensive investigations can fail to solve crimes when crucial evidence is lacking or when circumstances prevent effective investigation. For students of criminology and law enforcement, the case provides valuable lessons about the importance of proper crime scene management, evidence preservation, and coordinated investigation techniques. Amateur investigators and true crime enthusiasts have been drawn to the case for decades, with some devoting years of their lives to developing new theories or pursuing potential leads. This citizen involvement in criminal investigation, while sometimes valuable, has also contributed to the proliferation of speculation and misinformation surrounding the case. The Black Dahlia case has influenced how law enforcement agencies handle high-profile investigations. The problems encountered in the original investigation, media interference, information leaks, contaminated evidence, have been studied and used to develop better protocols for managing complex cases under public scrutiny. The case has also become a symbol of the dark side of the American dream, particularly the Hollywood dream that attracted Elizabeth to Los Angeles. Her story represents the vulnerability of young people seeking success in an exploitative industry and the dangers faced by those without resources or connections in a harsh urban environment. Academic study of the case has contributed to various fields including criminology, sociology, media studies, and gender studies. Researchers have used the case to examine topics such as victim representation in media, the relationship between crime and popular culture, and the social factors that contribute to both criminal behavior and societal responses to crime. The ongoing fascination with the case reflects broader cultural themes about mystery, justice, and the human need to find meaning in tragedy. The fact that the case remains unsolved allows each generation to interpret it through the lens of contemporary concerns and interests, ensuring its continued relevance and appeal. Despite the passage of more than 7 decades, the Elizabeth Short murder case continues to attract the attention of law enforcement agencies, private investigators, and amateur sleuths who believe that modern techniques and fresh perspectives might finally solve the mystery. These ongoing efforts represent both the enduring appeal of the case and the continuous evolution of investigative methods. The Los Angeles Police Department has never officially closed the Black Dahlia case, and it undergoes periodic review whenever new evidence emerges or when advances in forensic technology offer new possibilities for analysis. These reviews have occurred roughly every decade, with each generation of investigators bringing new techniques and perspectives to the evidence. In the 1990s, DNA analysis became available for the first time since the original investigation. LAPD investigators hoped that genetic material preserved from Elizabeth's body or from items allegedly sent by the killer might provide the breakthrough needed to solve the case. However, the age of the evidence and contamination from decades of handling limited the success of these tests. Several items believed to have been sent to newspapers by the killer were subjected to DNA analysis, but results were inconclusive. The chain of custody for these items was problematic, as they had been handled by numerous people over the years, and there was always uncertainty about whether they were actually connected to the crime or were hoaxes created by attention seekers. Modern computer databases have allowed investigators to cross-reference information from the case with criminal records, missing persons reports, and other cases from the same era. These searches have identified potential connections and patterns that might not have been apparent to investigators in 1947, though none have led to definitive conclusions. Geographic Information Systems, GIS, technology has been used to analyze the spatial relationships between locations significant to the case, where Elizabeth stayed, where her body was found, and where potential suspects lived or worked. These analyses have provided insights into the probable movement patterns of both Elizabeth and her killer during the crucial final week of her life. Private investigators have also taken up the case, sometimes hired by authors or documentary filmmakers, other times working independently due to personal interest in solving the mystery. These private efforts have sometimes uncovered new information or perspectives that official investigations missed, though they have also contributed to the proliferation of theories and speculation. Steve Hodel's investigation of his father, Dr. George Hodel, represents one of the most comprehensive private investigations of the case. Using his background as a former LAPD detective, Hodel applied modern investigative techniques to build a case against his father, including handwriting analysis, psychological profiling, and connections to other unsolved cases. While his conclusions remain controversial, his work demonstrates the potential value of applying contemporary methods to historical cases. Advances in psychological profiling have provided new insights into the likely characteristics of Elizabeth's killer. Modern criminal psychologists have analyzed the crime scene, the mutilation patterns, and the apparent staging to develop detailed profiles of the perpetrator's personality, background, and possible motivations. These profiles have helped focus attention on certain types of suspects while ruling out others. Cold case units, which didn't exist in 1947, have brought specialized expertise to reviewing the evidence. These units are specifically trained to work with aged evidence and to apply modern techniques to historical cases. Their systematic approach to case review has sometimes uncovered overlooked evidence or connections that weren't apparent to original investigators. Technological advances in photography and image enhancement have allowed investigators to extract new information from crime scene photographs taken in 1947. Digital enhancement techniques can reveal details that weren't visible in original prints and can clarify evidence that may have been obscured by the photographic technology of the era. Database searches of military records, medical school enrollment, and professional licensing have been conducted to identify individuals who might match the profile of Elizabeth's killer. The theory that the killer had medical knowledge has led to extensive searches of records for doctors, medical students, and others with anatomical training who were in Los Angeles during the relevant time period. Modern communication technology has also facilitated collaboration between investigators, researchers, and interested parties from around the world. Online forums and databases allow for the sharing of information and theories that might have remained isolated in earlier eras. While this increased communication has generated new ideas and connections, it has also contributed to information overload and the spread of unsubstantiated theories. Advances in forensic anthropology have been applied to reanalysis of Elizabeth's remains and autopsy records. Modern techniques for analyzing trauma patterns and wound characteristics have provided new insights into the weapons used and the sequence of injuries, potentially offering clues about the killer's methods and expertise. While the Black Dahlia case has become synonymous with mystery and speculation, it's crucial to remember that at its center was a real person whose life was brutally ended and whose family was forever changed by tragedy. Elizabeth Short was more than the sum of theories and media portrayals. She was a young woman with dreams, fears, relationships, and a complex inner life that has often been overshadowed by the circumstances of her death. Elizabeth's family in Massachusetts was devastated by her murder and by the subsequent media attention that invaded their privacy and distorted their memories of her. Her mother, Phoebe Short, lived with the pain of not only losing her daughter but of seeing Elizabeth's reputation damaged by sensationalistic media coverage that emphasized speculation about her personal life rather than the tragedy of her death. The Short family's efforts to preserve Elizabeth's memory and dignity were often frustrated by the ongoing public fascination with the case. Every new book, film, or documentary about the Black Dahlia brought renewed attention to their loss and often presented theories or interpretations that the family felt were inaccurate or hurtful. They were forced to repeatedly relive their tragedy in a public forum where they had little control over how Elizabeth was portrayed. Phoebe Short's other daughters also suffered from the attention surrounding their sister's murder. They found themselves defined by their relationship to a famous victim rather than being able to live their own lives privately. The stigma and curiosity that followed the family created ongoing stress and made normal social relationships difficult. The impact on Elizabeth's friends and acquaintances in Los Angeles was also significant. Many of the people who had known her during her final months found themselves subjected to intense scrutiny from both investigators and media. Some were treated as suspects, others as sources of information about Elizabeth's character and activities. The experience of being connected to such a notorious case affected their lives in ways that extended far beyond the immediate investigation. Robert "Red" Manley, as the last person confirmed to have seen Elizabeth alive, faced particular scrutiny that had lasting effects on his life. The suspicion that fell on him strained his marriage, affected his mental health, and followed him for years. Even after being cleared as a suspect, he continued to be associated with the case in ways that impacted his ability to move forward with his life. The French family in San Diego, who had provided Elizabeth with shelter during her final Christmas, also found themselves drawn into the media circus. Their act of kindness in helping a young woman in need resulted in their being questioned extensively and having their private lives examined by investigators and reporters. Behind the sensational headlines and theories were real people whose lives were disrupted, damaged, or destroyed by their connection to the case. The ongoing public fascination with the Black Dahlia mystery has often overlooked the human cost of both the original crime and the subsequent decades of speculation and investigation. Elizabeth herself has often been lost in the mythology that has grown around her death. The transformation of Elizabeth Short into the Black Dahlia created a symbolic figure that bore little resemblance to the actual person she had been. The real Elizabeth was a young woman struggling with poverty, family problems, and the harsh realities of trying to succeed in an unforgiving industry. Her dreams of stardom were probably unrealistic, but they were sincere and represented her hope for a better life. The letters Elizabeth wrote to her family reveal someone who was optimistic despite her circumstances, loyal to those she cared about, and determined to succeed against difficult odds. These personal documents show a side of her personality that is rarely reflected in the sensationalistic coverage of her death. She was affectionate with her family, concerned about their welfare, and eager to make them proud of her achievements. Those who knew Elizabeth personally consistently described her as kind, generous, and somewhat naive about the dangers of her situation in Los Angeles. She was remembered as someone who was willing to help others despite her own limited resources and who maintained her dignity even in difficult circumstances. These personal recollections provide a more complete picture of who Elizabeth was than the speculation about her activities and relationships. The tragedy of the Black Dahlia case extends beyond the unsolved mystery to encompass the life that was lost and the people who were affected by both the crime and its aftermath. While the investigation continues and theories proliferate, it's important to remember that the ultimate victim was a young woman whose life was cut short by an act of extreme violence, and whose memory has been complicated by decades of speculation and sensationalism. As we approach the 80th anniversary of Elizabeth Short's murder, the Black Dahlia case remains one of America's most famous unsolved crimes. Despite thousands of investigative hours, advanced forensic techniques, countless theories, and persistent public interest, the identity of her killer remains unknown. The case stands as a testament to both the limitations of criminal investigation and the enduring power of mystery in American culture. The failure to solve the case reflects the challenges faced by investigators in 1947, when forensic science was in its infancy and communication between law enforcement agencies was limited. The contamination of evidence, the overwhelming number of false leads, and the media circus that surrounded the investigation all contributed to the ultimate failure to identify and prosecute the killer. Yet the ongoing interest in the case also demonstrates the evolution of investigative techniques and the persistence of those who refuse to accept that some crimes cannot be solved. Each generation of investigators has brought new tools and perspectives to the evidence, and while none has achieved the breakthrough that would solve the case, each has contributed to a more complete understanding of the crime and its context. The Black Dahlia case has become more than just an unsolved murder. It has become a cultural touchstone that reflects American society's relationship with crime, media, and mystery. The transformation of Elizabeth Short from a real person into a symbol demonstrates how victims of notorious crimes can become mythologized in ways that both preserve and distort their memory. The case continues to attract attention from professional investigators, amateur sleuths, writers, and filmmakers who see in it both a compelling mystery and a reflection of broader themes about justice, media, and society. Each new examination of the evidence or theory about the killer's identity adds to the ever-growing body of speculation and analysis that surrounds the case. Perhaps the most important lesson of the Black Dahlia case is the reminder that behind every high-profile crime is a human being whose life had value beyond their role as a victim. Elizabeth Short was a young woman with dreams, relationships, and a future that was violently taken from her. While the mystery of her death continues to fascinate, her life and the impact of her loss on those who knew her should not be forgotten. The case also serves as a reminder of the importance of proper criminal investigation procedures, evidence preservation, and the careful balance between public interest and investigative integrity. The lessons learned from the problems that plagued the original investigation have contributed to improvements in how law enforcement agencies handle high-profile cases. As new technologies continue to develop and new generations of investigators examine the evidence, there remains the possibility that the Black Dahlia case may eventually be solved. DNA analysis continues to improve, databases become more comprehensive, and investigative techniques become more sophisticated. The killer, if still alive, would be well over 90 years old, but the evidence of the crime remains available for analysis. Whether or not the case is ever definitively solved, it will likely continue to occupy a unique place in American criminal history. The Black Dahlia has become a symbol of the unsolvable mystery, the perfect crime, and the dark side of the American dream. Elizabeth Short's story, tragic as it is, has become part of the cultural fabric of Los Angeles and of America itself. In the end, the Black Dahlia case reminds us that some mysteries may never be solved, but the search for truth and justice must continue. Elizabeth Short deserves to be remembered not just as the victim of a notorious unsolved crime, but as a person whose life had meaning and whose death represents a tragedy that extends far beyond the failure to identify her killer. Her story, in all its complexity and sadness, remains a powerful reminder of both the fragility of life and the enduring human desire to understand and find meaning in tragedy. The investigation continues, the theories persist, and the mystery endures. The Black Dahlia case, like Elizabeth Short herself, has become immortal in the American consciousness, a permanent reminder of a life cut short and a crime that refuses to be forgotten or forgiven.